record. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really fortunate today to be joined by Jack from Ramblers, and we're going to explore a bit about walking and I guess how schools can get more involved with that. Before we get going though, what I do want to do is just remind people that we've now got quite a cool catalogue of different organisations and people who we've had conversations and discussions with, including Culture Declares, London Mining. We recently talked about degrowth as well. So definitely go have a look at some of those recorded conversations. And just to remind you that I guess what we're trying to do is push the boundaries of what teachers are doing and to think more critically and open up kind of their practice within schools. So thanks again for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Jack then, just to introduce himself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jack Cornish. I'm head of paths at the Ramblers. So my team look after everything related to paths and rights of way across GB. And
so Jack, Ramblers is an organisation, I guess, is steeped in history, and actually there's some key events that have been really monumental in instructing kind of its setup. And what are some of those?
Sure, yeah. So the Ramblers was formed in 1935, so it's definitely got a history. But even before that, there were sort of regional organisations that came together in the Ramblers for the first time. I mean, probably the event that's most cited as a founding event of the Ramblers is the Kinder Scout mass trespass. So that's when working class men and women from industrial towns in the north wanted to assert their rights that they always had to go and walk up Kinder Scout in the Peak District. There is some slight nuance to that, I think. Actually, many of the founder members of the Ramblers were slightly opposed to that at the time. They thought it was a bit too radical, if anything. So there's an interesting tension there. But many of the people who were involved in Kinder Scout did go on to be, leading lights in that debate within the Ramblers for many years after that.
What then are the aims of the Ramblers? What are sort of the organisation set out to do?
Yeah, so we're Britain's biggest walking charity, and I think probably it rests on two things. One is getting people out walking. So we put on group walks, we put on Wellbeing walks, which take people who haven't walked much out on with chronic health issues or haven't walked much out on walks. But then one of the key things, and this is the area that I work in, is we're sort of about breaking down the barriers. And so we have an amazing rights of way network in England and Wales. We have open access land. We have the right to roam in Scotland. And, the Ramblers were instrumental in those pieces of legislation being put in place. And we're still fighting every day to protect individual paths, to expand that network and to improve that network where we can walk across Great Britain.
But so the reality though is it's only 8% of Britain that we're able to access, is that right?
Well, I mean, I do see that stat a lot. I would slightly take question with it, because although I think that stat is 8% that is open access land, so that's where you can walk, in sort of open areas, and we're certainly not saying that shouldn't be increased. I think what it does overlook is 140,000 miles of public rights of way, which, although you can't roam freely, they are this network that takes you, across the country. And, unlike open access land, that the rights of way have a higher level of responsibility. You should be certain that it's open and clear, and that it's signposted. So we don't get those necessarily with areas of open access land. So yeah, I think it's higher than 8% if you take into account the rights of way as well.
Okay, oh, that's interesting then. The thing on my mind as well that I wanted to throw in early on was that I think most young people's experience of walking with school is often Duke of Edinburgh.
Yep.
Which is an interesting experience because that's so focused on having certain aims, and it brings people into landscapes very much for the purpose of kind of achieving an award. I wonder, like, kind of if you had thoughts about that idea that that's often the way that young people get introduced to walking?
Yeah, obviously, you know, Duke of Edinburgh is fantastic for many reasons. I do think that actually, you know, I think you hit on something there though. You know, it's about challenge and it's about challenging yourself, and that's obviously, you know, that can be really valuable for kids. But also, I think what I'd love to see is that more of that walking just for leisure and just for the sake of it and for pleasure. You know, that would be fantastic. That's something that would be, ingrained in kids early. It wasn't particularly in me. You know, I grew to love walking particularly in my, I suppose, like teenage and 20s and stuff. So, you know, it'd be fantastic if that was, I suppose, part of how people interacted with the landscape, you know, from a much earlier age.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a role for schools to take far greater ownership in terms of the rights of way and the path networks in their local community, and then for them to be more active in using them. I think there's so much potential for schools to play a key role in that.
Definitely, and I think, you know, the one thing that I'm really passionate about is that it isn't just a network that's about utility, although that obviously is important. And it isn't even just about, you know, leisure, but actually it's a really historic network as well. So I think there's something really interesting that schools could do with, you know, looking at, you know, going and walking these paths and looking at what our path network looks like now, but also, you know, there's loads of maps available online of what it used to look like 120 years ago or longer. And actually, you know, there's some really interesting things that could be brought out there about, you know, how people have moved around the landscape over generations and how, you know, just the world around us has changed in different ways over, you know, decades and centuries. You know, I think there could be something really interesting there.
Yeah, what comes to mind is the sort of Robert Macfarlane ideas of lost words as well, and the language that's used to describe certain historic pathways and bits of landscapes that by getting young people out into those landscapes and exploring them and then introducing to them terminology could be really key. The other thing I'm thinking of as well is imagine a history lesson where you go and wander around the local community, and then that is a way to interact and learn about the history of a place, but to make that more purposeful.
Yeah, definitely, and seeing, you know, and just being, I suppose, aware of what's around you and the clues in the landscape about how it's been used over centuries. You know, pretty much every inch of Britain has been settled at various points. You know, we don't have many wild places, which, you know, there's a whole separate argument about how good a thing that is, but what it does mean is that our history is sort of there to be seen, and I think a lot of it can be seen from the path network and from open access land. And, you know, wouldn't it be fantastic if you could go out with schools and see, you know, talk about what's around you and talk about how communities are linked up and talk about what sort of people would have used a particular path. You know, was it used for, you know, just someone going from a cottage to the local pub or the field, or was it used to go to market sort of regionally, locally or nationally? You know, and there's all of these interesting, you know, sort of parts of our of how we've lived over centuries. And, you know, even bringing in stuff like, you know, the countryside in particular is sort of littered with old railways, and, you know, so there's all of these different things that you could explore in you know, in sort of looking at, you know, what the countryside used to look like, what it looks like now, what's changed. I think that could be really interesting.
I was going to mention this actually at the start, but it's the pictures that you tweet. That's something that I really enjoy looking at, and I think that's a way as well to document, I guess, the history that you do see and help share some of that. But some of the photos you share are so interesting, of really quirky aspects of the landscape that you find.
Yeah, and you know, I don't have access to much more than everyone else does in terms of, you know, the internet. You know, and actually, like, it's about, you know, it's about having, you know, about looking, I suppose, and then also thinking like, oh, why does that look like it does? What's that building about? What's that? You know, why is that? You know, why does that path go there? What is that old interesting bit of industrial history in the landscape? And then looking it up. You know, looking at the old maps that are all freely available, or just like Googling, and, you know, you can start to piece together the sort of history of a really local community, and also how, and again, sort of bringing it back to paths in a way, like what I think is fantastic about the network that we've got, and I'm not saying it couldn't be better, and I'm not saying that a right to roam wouldn't be great as well, but what's fantastic about the network we've got is that it is hyper local. Other countries have some amazing, national or regional trails that are sort of flagship things that people, go on a trek to do, or they drive to for the, for a day's walk or whatever. But we've got this hyper local network that goes, pretty much from everyone's doorsteps, to, you could walk from that from, Cornwall to Newcastle, like all on the same network. And I think, that means that there's opportunities to do that exploration, everywhere, and you don't even have to get in a car or anything like that. You could, it could be right near the school.
What you're getting me thinking about as well then is this idea of, okay, yeah, the path network is a kind of historical thing, but also it's got a role to play in our present and future, and going full circle. And I was going to say that one of the occasions that I've met you in person, Jack, is actually at the Dan Raven Ellison's, there was a special event around the Slowways project that he was developing, and that idea of this hyper local network of paths to change the way that people think about travel as well. And I think that's another really interesting idea then, is to maybe challenge young people, challenge families, challenge people within the community to think differently about the way they get from A to B. So I know you're saying, let's not necessarily use the path network just as a utilitarian sort of getting about, but maybe there is potential in that as well.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I don't think we think about walking as active travel enough, and I, and I do think there's a massive opportunity with the current network, but there's also a big opportunity to improve the network and to create new paths that really facilitate that, that utility. We, because of the historic nature of the network, it means that it's largely unplanned, and it reflects that history. And obviously that is fantastic for all the reasons I've been saying, but it means that we also know that, because of the way that where people lived has changed, whole new estates have been built, whole new towns have been built. How much do we actually think about where we need new paths? Where are these gaps? Where are the things that actually, if you created a half a mile path from this housing estate to this shops and hospital or school, how much could that, help like the climate crisis or mental and physical well-being? And I think there's a big opportunity, for that to be pressed much more. We're doing some research at the moment to really look at the network. Where is it? How dense is it? How close is it to where people live? How green and wild is it? And it'd be really interesting to see, where are those gaps, and where, literally, if you could just fill in this small bit of path, it would open up these landscapes for this, thousands of people and stuff. So I think there's definitely scope to create a much better network that could help meet some of those challenges.
Is a lot of that to do though with landowners and the relationship with landowners? Because again, that is a sort of historical one where the Ramblers has been involved in some high-profile court cases in terms of bringing back paths that were missing. Because what's the story as well that deadline has been removed now?
Yeah. So just on the landowner point, I think in terms of creating new paths, I think there are new opportunities to do that. I think to actually work with landowners to, there's obviously historic paths that had not recorded that we can bring back that would help those gaps, but also let's look at completely new things that have never been there at all. And with stuff like the replacement for the agricultural payments from Europe, public access is one of those public goods that farmers should be paid for, and the Ramblers are really keen that that's followed through, and that it's not, it's permanent, it's public access in perpetuity, because we've seen loads of schemes before where individuals get paid to create paths or open up access, and then the scheme finishes and it all stops. But in terms of saving those historic paths, we were given a deadline of the 1st of January 2026. Just over a year ago, the Ramblers found over 49,000 miles of potential lost rights of way. So if you do the maths, we weren't going to save, as much as we could have done. The government the UK government have recently announced that for England, that will be, they're looking to repeal that. So that means there won't be a deadline. So we'll have, all the time we need to put these paths back on the map. And that follows the Welsh government, who made a similar announcement a year or two ago. So we think it's fantastic because it means we will be able to, save many more paths. But I think the other key message is that it's, the work still needs to happen. We still need volunteers to help us, and because these paths are still under threat. Because they're not recorded, somebody could, build a house across it. Somebody could build a barn across it. A lot of them might not be accessible now. So there's still this sort of untapped network out there that needs to be put back on the map.
I think I don't know some schools have done this, but there's great potential as well in schools being part of that process of exploring old maps, talking to people within their local community and finding those sorts of paths that might well have disappeared.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, sorry, you go.
Well, no. The other thing I was going to say is I'm really keen to understand as well the link with direct action and the Ramblers, because I think often within schools in particular, people shy away from that because they perceive it to sort of be kind of a bit dangerous and a bit bad. But maybe actually direct action linked to access rights is maybe a bit more palatable. I wondered, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, the Ramblers have got a history, although it's always been a slightly contested history, I think, in terms of, there's different currents in the Ramblers in terms of, direct action or not. So yeah, I mean, I think one thing to say is that public rights of way that aren't recorded, they are still public rights of way. We wouldn't necessarily wanting to encourage everyone to go out and start walking them, but actually, you've got the perfect right to walk them. And so, and I mean, one thing to say is that, protest has been a massive important part of the Ramblers' history. And, we've been, along with lots of other organisations, fighting against some of the most recent attacks on that on protest and on criminalisation of trespass, because we need all charities, all civil society organisations, all people need the ability to be able to assert their rights to protest. And so we're really keen that we feel very strongly that we will need that, because it's been a massive part of our history, and I'm sure it'll be a part of our future. I mean, the Ramblers also take direct action in so many different ways. We take councils to court, we take landowners to court, we make sure that we assert the rights of the public to use their network, as a charity. And so, I suppose direct action takes different forms, but we definitely need the ability to be able to protest, to trespass, and to kick up a fuss.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such an important part that young people need to be educated about, and that you talked a bit before about the idea of like a people's history and kind of understanding the commons. And I think often that gets omitted from history or from whatever aspects it is in terms of a young person's education. But I think bringing that in and helping young people understand about the role of the Ramblers or kind of similar organisations in actually creating the society and the world that we live in is a really fundamental part of, or it should be, of everyone's education. Yeah,
100%. I mean, I think there's so many parts of our history that get overlooked, right? And I think in terms of what we're talking about, two big areas are sort of land, property, ownership. That doesn't really get talked about. It certainly didn't get talked about in my schooling, but also working class history and the sort of history of quote unquote ordinary people, I think often gets overlooked, and even more so rural working class history. So I think our path network does embody those things because it was created by ordinary people, going to work, going to enjoy themselves, going to trade and to meet up with people and to socialize. That history gets lost, especially when it comes to the countryside, I think. And also, it's called a public rights of way network, and it is for the public, and it is the whole public have the right to use it. And I think we, as the Ramblers and as the whole of the walking community, need to do more, and with schools hopefully as well, to make sure that everyone sees it as a network that is theirs, and it's not just for a particular section of society, that it is for everyone to use. And it isn't just about walking, it's a network that you can cycle on or ride a horse on, or so whatever, but it should be there for everyone, and it's part of our sort of common citizenship that everyone should be able to access.
I guess, are you sort of suggesting there's lots of statistics that show that actually, like, rural landscapes in particular are often seen to be quite white landscapes, that certain, like you say, groups in society don't feel particularly welcome? Because there's some really interesting movements and kind of other walking groups as well that are helping to encourage more people to access and engage in the landscape.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been fantastic to see some of those groups make such an impact, like Muslim hikers and steppers and Black Girls Hike, and I do think there's an important the Ramblers are not the most diverse organisation, but we are keen to become more diverse as an organisation, but also to support the whole of the walking sector, or just the whole of the public with getting out there walking, and so I think that's going to be one of the most important themes of around our rights to access over the next 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it's going to be. So yeah, I think that's going to be like massively important.
One of the other things I wanted to throw in here was there's some kind of interesting challenges that you've done over the years, and is it at the moment you're aiming for 2022 miles this year?
Yeah.
And then the other one that you've done, or you're doing, is walking every path in London.
Yeah, I'm doing that, and
okay.
I say I'm doing that. I suspect it might even be a futile effort, because I haven't actually looked up how many. I'm walking every street in London, but that also includes paths and parks and everything. So I haven't quite got the courage to look up exactly how many streets there are in London, but I'm sort of chipping away at it. But it does give you this really amazing appreciation of a city that I've always lived in, that I was born and brought up in. I was born in Southeast London. There's probably people that have lived in Southeast London all their lives who have never been to some parts of Northwest London, because why would you? There's not your friends there, there's not anything you need to go there for. And so it really gets you out of your local area, and maybe that's something that schools can do. They can it doesn't have to be a citywide thing, but the parish or the council area or the ward or whatever, walk every street and see what else you can find, because there'll probably be streets two or three streets away from you that you've never walked down because it's not on the way to anything. And so, but you never know what's going to be down there. So it's a really fun way of exploring.
Yeah, is it Ricky Gates in the US is a runner, and he's someone who's been championing this.
I think he did San Francisco or something like that.
Yeah, he did do.
Yeah.
And it got put into quite an interesting documentary, and part of what the narrative around that was that he was saying, like you said, you kind of get exposed to see aspects of the place that you live that you wouldn't normally see. Often we travel to and from work or school the same route, but also it was about the people he met and the conversations you have, because I think that's when you're out walking, there's a barrier that's broken down in terms of communication. When you're in a car, it's rare that you see someone have a proper conversation with someone because of those physical barriers. But when you're walking, so often, I can only picture having to walk around people who are having a conversation. Often you meet people who have stopped and are talking, and like you said, to be able to bring young children into that and to encourage them to actually explore and engage and then have conversations with local people, that could be really kind of an opportunity to learn that goes above and beyond what can be achieved within the classroom. There's so much potential, I think, for schools to break out of those barriers and take children places that they haven't necessarily been before.
Yeah, 100%. And walking side by side and talking is like the most unconfrontational and it's just such a good way to like interact with someone, I think, because it's not, some people, when you're staring face to face with someone, it can feel a bit like, it's a sort of question and answer almost. But actually the act of walking alongside someone, I think can be an amazing, way to open people up and to explore.
Maybe that leads on to that idea of appreciating walking and being out with the rest of nature as being fundamental to our health and well-being, and that being something that's people have realized more and more during COVID. Have you noticed a lot of that as well?
Yeah, we've seen that. I mean, I suppose it's not a novel observation, but yeah, we've seen that people have really engaged with the sort of mental and the physical well-being that you get from going for a walk, whether that's a 10-minute walk around the block or 3 or 4 hours in a day or whatever. We've also seen that people have explored that network of paths that is in their local area. When people were confined to their local area, they walked all the streets they hadn't found before. They found, I've got some paths right near me. I've got, they maybe looked at the OS map for the first time or looked on Google Maps properly and saw some green lines that show there's some, takes them to parks and to green spaces they've never been to. So it's been fantastic for people to really, not just to come to walking, but to come to walking as part of that everyday activity and as part of a localized activity that, as I say, isn't about driving out to a country park necessarily, or going to a national park for a weekend. That is, a walking environment and our walking infrastructure is everywhere, and it's been fantastic to see people, interact with that.
Yeah. I often have these sort of ideas of, imagine if rather than a tutor group with a teacher and 10-15 students, rather than spending half an hour sat in a classroom, imagine if they had the ability to just go, let's go for a walk, and actually how more beneficial that would be as a time spent rather than in the classroom. I think often within schools there's perceived barriers to some of these things, health and safety, or the other one as well is that sort of safety idea. So if you have thoughts on kind of safety of being out walking.
I think it's, you can never say something's 100% safe. It's probably, but ultimately we want kids to come to school on their bikes or walking, right, or on public transport. And so I think, going out for a walk whilst you're at school, could be massively valuable. I think, there is, I think we have a overly extreme perception of risk sometimes, and I think that. So I would encourage people to get out and to do it. And we've seen that organizations have started to embrace like walking meetings and stuff like that sort of thing. And so why can't we spread that to schools as well?
Yeah, I think teachers would really love the idea of a department meeting that is out in the fresh air rather than in a room. But what about, have the Ramblers explored ideas of gender and kind of both safety, but also like, do men walk more than women?
So we within the Ramblers, we have I think more women members than men. It's pretty even, but I think it's just more women members than men. And going on our group walks, we have I think more women walkers than men. Obviously, like, individual safety can be, it's sort of depressing that it still is an issue, or that it is an issue that that we've highlighted and that we've but it's, without sounding, it's a societal change, isn't it? And that's that's where we need to get to. But it's it's something that we've certainly, no one should feel uncomfortable or unsafe when out walking, and that's that's where we should get to.
I wonder that there's this reciprocal relationship where basically there's society influences people's behaviors in terms of walking, but also the act of walking can influence society. That the more people that we get walking, the kind of safer that setup and environment becomes. One of the last things I wanted to touch on was this idea that walking, because it doesn't involve consumption, that actually it's a really interesting way to think about behavior and engagement within society.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think it's true that walking is free. It is a free thing. There's obviously nuance to that, and I think sometimes we forget the nuance. But actually, for most places in the UK, you don't need expensive hiking boots. You could do it in a pair of trainers. You can do it in jeans. Unless you're not going to be planning on going up Snowdon probably anytime soon in those. But I mean, obviously that also doesn't take into account, I think, that there are still barriers that are financial and class-based to walking. So, with the decimation of local train services, and then in more recent decades, local bus services, it's really difficult to be able to get out to some of these like more open landscapes, unless you want a really long walk, to get out to them and to access these places without having a car. And so we do overlook some of those things sometimes. But as I said, the network goes everywhere. And so, it is ultimately something that can be done without kit and without a subscription, and, that is free and open to everyone.
I guess also walking opens up other opportunities as well, be it spotting wildlife or, like we were saying, sort of learning about the landscape as well. So beyond walking itself, there's so many other free opportunities that then present themselves once you then begin.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think is really important for schools is understanding, like food production and how food's produced, and in positive ways and not so positive ways sometimes, but an understanding that how that sort of economy works, I think could be really valuable, because I mean, it's a sort of something that maybe is thrown around too much, but that people are divorced from their food. And I'm sure that there has some truth in that. So I think that can be another one of those many things, as you say, in terms of learning about wildlife, learning about history. There's so many things that it's a gateway to doing, and a way to engage with that.
You've got me thinking about another one of Dan's projects, the UK in 100 seconds, and thinking about land cover and how the landscape's used. And the idea, if people haven't seen that, it's I'll link it in the description, but the idea is that he walked through the landscape, and the proportion that he was walking through that landscape was the percentage land cover across the UK, and it was using a drone footage. But actually, in one of the previous schools I've worked in, we then made that for the local community. We sort of worked out the proportions. Again, that's something I think, as you suggest, that getting young people out and challenging those misconceptions. So thinking, like you say, about food production, but also about land cover. We often throw around, ask people how much of the UK is built on.
Yeah, exactly. It's Britain's full.
Yeah, people have this perception that we've not got space for people, particularly within the rhetoric around migrants.
Yeah.
Only 7% of the UK is built on. And that's not to suggest that, we've got 93% that we can then now cover with buildings, but those proportions are really interesting. And through walking, you can kind of understand and explore those better.
100%. And some of those things, some of that 7% probably won't even be housing. There'll be a lot of, airports and golf courses and stuff like that in there as well, So, it's completely, it's and actually when you start going out walking, you can see that on the ground. Most of Britain isn't someone's back garden or that house. It is much more wider landscape.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Jack. I was going to do a bit of a summary. So some of the things that we're thinking of is schools could incorporate the Ramblers into maybe an aspect of history and use it as a platform to then teach direct action and understand working class history and how people have been involved in engaging with the landscape. There's so many opportunities for schools to actually take young people out walking, and it doesn't have to be DOV. It doesn't have to be a really purposeful field trip. It could just be for the sake of going for a walk. What else are we thinking?
There's exploring, maybe before a walk or after a walk, looking at the historic maps that are available online for the area as well, and sort of linking that in, I think, could be fantastic.
And so one of the things you were saying as well is about that idea of helping engage with the local community about saving some of the paths as well, thinking what exists. And then also you were suggesting that maybe coming up with ideas for new paths. And then even, you know, imagine if a school helped campaign and lobby to get a new footpath put in that made far more sense for their students. And you know, there's so much potential for them to have ownership as well within their local community.
Yeah. And to mould the local community, you know, to mould what it looks like for generations to come. Definitely.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jack, and good luck with everything that you've got going on the rest of the year.
Thanks very much. It's been great to talk to you. Cheers.